bullet wound. There was no trauma observed at all.
Has this guy had a heart attack? Did he drink too much?
But as investigators scratch the surface, a more nefarious scenario emerges.
I have to tell you something.
Even though he's 65 years of age, he's quite the ladies' man.
This adds a whole new wrinkle into this case.
To crack this mystery, Kenda and his team must nail down a crucial detail.
We had no idea what occurred during that hour and a half.
It could have been a very volatile situation.
He's gonna snap one of these days.
But it's our mission to find out. First reports are never to be believed. Don't put something in my head. Just tell me where. I will go there and I will determine what we've got.
Girl, I can't believe you gave him your number.
It may be late, but Carol McClendon and Rhonda Simmons are still riding high after a night on the town.
Girl, he was cute.
Carol's gonna drop Rhonda off at her townhouse.
Wait, what's going on at your mom's house?
Carol points out to Rhonda, but there's an ambulance parked there.
Can you imagine what they'd be thinking? Is my family in danger? Are they hurt? They have no idea what's going on, but they know that it's something very serious.
Oh my God.
I'm often up several times during the night, and sometimes I cannot go back to sleep. That particular morning, I was standing in front of the window, looking at the city lights, wondering what everyone was up to at that moment. And the phone rang, and I knew that somebody was up to something.
It's Kenda. Okay, I'll be right there.
Careful, Joe.
I will.
20 minutes later, Kenda pulls up to a suburban home awash in police lights. Detective Perry Freeman is already on the scene.
Hey, Lieutenant. Sorry to drag you out at this hour.
Anything else going on?
In '94, I was one of 6 homicide detectives that worked under Joe Kenda. And when I arrived, there were a number of uniforms already there.
So what do we got?
Victim's name is Willie Jackson, age 65.
He spent 20 years in the Air Force. Now this guy, he looks like he's 45. He's in great shape for a 65-year-old man.
You know, he's somebody who really takes care of himself. He works at the fitness center at Fort Carson.
His wife's a lot younger, maybe mid-40s. He lived here with her and her teenage son.
So who made the call?
Wife did.
Said she found her husband on the bedroom floor unresponsive, no pulse.
Thinks it might have been alcohol poisoning.
Alcohol poisoning. What do you think?
I only did a walkthrough, but she could be right.
The Major Crimes Unit responds to any suspicious death. And in a case like this, I don't think anybody knew if we had alcohol poisoning or if it could be something else.
Now let's go take a closer look while we wait for the coroner to arrive.
Normally, when I walk into a crime scene, nobody's in there. And when I walked into this crime scene,
So what's with the full house?
there was a mob in there.
They were here when I got here.
There are 3 women and a young male standing around in this kitchen.
So who are all these people?
These 2 are the wife's daughter and a friend.
He said they saw the EMTs and they stopped on their way home. So they weren't here when this event occurred.
How about the other 2?
Well, one is his wife, Tony, and the kid is named Malik. He is the wife's son by another marriage.
So they live here. They were here when the ambulance got on scene.
We can't have them all standing around together, though.
Yes, sir.
It's important to have witnesses, but it's not important to have them in the crime scene. So my next direction was move these people out of this building.
I want you to take the 2 witnesses and put them in separate patrol cars.
Yes, sir.
If you allow these people to be together, you could wind up with a similar story that they have rehearsed. Further, we don't want them to overhear or oversee what we're doing.
Let's take a look around.
The first thing you do is make an assessment of what kind of place is this. Are things broken and out of place and turned over?
Someone runs a tight ship here.
Yeah, it sure looks that way.
I found the house to be fairly tidy, well kept. Things were in their normal places.
The one thing detectives find to be out of place is the victim himself.
When we first observed Willie's body, he was on the floor of a bedroom.
It was a strange place to lay down. I guess he was drunk.
You could smell the alcohol. So the assumption was that he had just been drinking recently.
Paramedics said they found him in that position.
In Colorado, a body is never disturbed until a coroner is present. We observe what we can see without moving the body.
On initial observation, there was no ligature marks, there was no bullet wound, there was no trauma observed at all.
Well, he could have had a heart attack. Maybe hit the bottle too hard.
Yep. There's more empties in the kitchen. Wife might have been right about the alcohol poisoning.
So alcohol is kind of an interesting drug because at really low dosage, it acts kind of like a stimulant. It gets people excited. It makes you, more comfortable at parties. It makes you outgoing. But at high doses, it has the opposite effect. It's a very powerful depressant.
A person can actually drink himself to death by consuming way too much alcohol. The body functions slow down, and pretty soon you can just stop breathing.
Hey, Joe. Heard you might have a body for me.
Yeah, he's all yours. Let's talk to witnesses.
We leave the coroner to do his work, and it's time to do our work. Let's talk to the other humans that aren't dead and see what they know about how Willie came to be the way he is.
Willie, come Lieutenant Kenda. It's Detective Friedman.
So the first person I speak to is the son, Malik. He is Tony's son. He is not Willie's son.
All right, do you mind if we ask you a few questions?
He exhibits the behavior of a normal 17-year-old, sullen and quiet and distrustful of adults.
First off, I'm sorry about your stepfather.
We weren't that type.
Did you get along?
No, not really.
I don't think there was a very good relationship between Malik and Willie Jackson. Maybe some jealousy, I'm not sure. But we certainly wanted to take note of what his attitude was like. He was somewhat cooperative, but we were also somewhat suspicious of him.
He's not quite as upset as you would think somebody in this position should be. Does that raise suspicion? Sure it does. But it also could be just, he's a 17-year-old kid, didn't get along well with his stepfather, and just doesn't really care.
Where's your natural father?
He's up in Washington. Haven't talked to him in a while, though.
Why don't you tell us what happened tonight?
Malik says, I was out with friends. I didn't come home till about 11:30.
And my mom was upset, told me to go to my room. Willie was in the mood.
Malik says that in a mood to him means that Willie's drunk. Willie's always drunk, and therefore he's always in a mood.
Malik had indicated that Willie Jackson was basically an alcoholic and pretty much drank every day.
With alcoholism, they have to maintain a certain level of alcohol in their system, and so they might keep a bottle in their drawer or have some in their car or kind of stash it around because they know that their body will crave it throughout the day.
He always wants to come home and fight, and he doesn't stop until he passes out.
So what else did your mom say?
She told me to stay out of his way. Stay in my room.
Who the hell do you think you are? Talking to me like that?
Mother, you drunk-ass fool!
Malik advised that he could hear his mother and Willie upstairs arguing.
So he turned up his television so he didn't have to hear the disturbance.
According to Malik, he was up for the next few hours, and eventually hunger struck.
He said, my mother called to me from the master bedroom.
Yeah.
Malik! Malik!
What?
Get in here!
So Malik walked into the bedroom and saw his mother kneeling on the floor next to Willie.
She was checking for a pulse, but there was nothing. She called 911, but it was too late. He was already dead.
Excuse me, Lieutenant. Sorry to interrupt. They need you inside.
Okay. Thank you, Malik. So what do you got so far?
I'll show you. So it's totally possible that he died of natural causes or alcohol poisoning, but take a look at this.
So he rolls the victim over onto his stomach. Now we have a mystery on our hands. We are summoned to this home because Mr. Willie Jackson is dead on the second floor. When the wife called 911, she said alcohol poisoning, or coroner reports he has a puncture wound that we cannot explain.
It's small, but it could go pretty deep. It's in a really bad spot.
There are important vessels that run through the thigh, one of which is the femoral artery, the main artery that supplies blood to the lower extremity.
If it was deep enough, could have hit an artery. He could have bled to death. It's too soon to say. Have to wait on the autopsy.
Right. Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Kind of a strange place for a stabbing.
Yeah, just one wound.
Someone with a knife. It's a very personal way to kill somebody. When that occurs and rage is a factor, there are multiple wounds. Willie has no other wounds. None. That's very, very odd.
The wound did not look like it was like a really bad stab wound. You know, you generally think of somebody getting stabbed in the chest or slitting the throat or stomach or something like that. You know, you don't think of somebody who wants to kill somebody stabbing them or slicing them in the back of the thigh. So that also is really unusual because it's like that would make it seem like more of an accident than an intentional stabbing.
We're all thinking that's a very unusual place to be stabbed. And we thought possibly he had cut himself on something outside, or maybe he had been injured before he even came home from work. He could have fallen on something.
It's odd. Even if the wound didn't hit the artery, it seems like it still would have bled plenty.
So if we're concerned about blood loss being the significant factor here, where is it?
There's no blood on the bed or the walls.
Well, this place is clean.
And he pulls the sheets back. Ooh, now that's significant.
We found that there was a large soaking of blood into the mattress of the bed next to the body.
That's a lot of blood.
The blood stain has been concealed by clean sheets. Why would somebody do that?
Hey, Lieutenant, can I talk to you?
Of course.
I don't know if it was connected or not, but I've answered 2 calls here today. The last one was about several hours ago.
He said somebody called 911 and we responded here on a welfare check.
Well, I think if police are called to the same location for domestic violence several times over a course of time, that, you know, they might be concerned that something's going on that they really don't know. But there hadn't been, this wasn't a situation where Tony and Willie had been involved in police, you know, coming to check on them often. So police really didn't have any background information that there was trouble here. They were just doing what someone had asked them to do. So a welfare check is generally somebody else who sees or hears something going on somewhere and is concerned and calls police and says, hey, you know, this might be happening, or I hear this going on. Can you please check the welfare of these people?
Miss Jackson answered the door, said nothing going on, and she didn't need the police. So we left.
And then a couple hours later, she calls back, and now we're here.
Who made the first 911 call?
I don't know. I'll have to call dispatch to find out.
So where's the wife now?
She's over here.
I'm gonna talk to her. Thanks.
Up to this point in the investigation, Tony hasn't been talked to yet. Now it's time to find out what was going on in this household tonight.
Who concealed blood in my crime scene?
Tony, I'm Lieutenant Kenda. Very sorry about your husband. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
No, that's fine.
When I meet Tony, she's upset, somewhat soft-spoken.
How long have you known Willie?
We've been married for about 2 years now.
She said, I met him at the Garcia Gym on Fort Carson, where he's employed as a trainer.
Hey, can you spot me?
Absolutely.
Think I need a little help on my phone.
I think so. Go ahead, show it to me again. What do you like to do for fun?
Why are you asking me out?
Maybe.
I'm Tony.
Willie.
She said, we fell in love very quickly.
He was actually married at the time, but wasn't happy, so he left her for me.
And it's your belief he died of alcohol poisoning?
When I met him, I knew he liked to drink, but I never realized it was this bad.
She said, I noticed in the last few months that the drinking became a problem and we began to argue a lot.
Can you walk me through what happened?
Willie came home late. He usually gets off at 9, but didn't get here until 10:30. I was on the phone with my ex-husband at the time, discussing some issues about our son Malik.
Cornelius, he needs his father. You should come out and see him.
Well, yeah!
She said he was so drunk he could barely stand up.
Can't you see I'm on the phone? Oh my God, is that blood? What the hell did you do now?
None of your damn business. Who the hell are you talking to?
Will you lower your voice? It's just Malik's dad.
Oh, give me that.
Willie! He gets so jealous over the smallest thing. I was so mad. I yelled at him to go to bed and sleep it off. And finally, he slunk off.
Tony believes her ex-husband, Cornelius, must have been worried when the line went dead. Apparently, he called 911 to have police check on her.
But she sent the officers away because at the time they arrived, there was no problem, she said.
What happened next?
Well, Malik had come home, and I sent him to his room in case Willie woke up. I didn't want any more tension between those two. And I guess the whole time, Willie kept going on his whiskey. So I went in to check on him. Oh my God, Willie, are you okay? So much blood. Did you drink all this?
She said he mumbled something. She couldn't understand what it was.
Okay. Just lift your head up.
But she put a pill under his head and decided that she needed to clean these sheets before any stains set in.
So I got that going and something just didn't feel right. I had this sick feeling. So I went back to check on him again. Oh my God, Willie! Malik!
Why?
Malik, get in here!
She called Malik, her son, to come up, and at that point they realized it was probably time to call 911.
Here's the bed sheets and rags that I used to clean the carpet in the bedroom.
Okay, now this is important. Did you clean up blood anywhere else in the house besides the bedroom?
No, why?
So, well, he's got a puncture wound in his leg. And if it hit a major vein or an artery, it's possible he could have bled to death.
Seriously?
We're also considering the possibility that he was stabbed this evening.
You mean someone could have killed him?
She appeared to be very shocked.
Can you think of anyone that might want to harm your husband?
No.
You mentioned he left work at 9 and didn't get home until 10:30. Any idea where he stopped on the way?
He didn't say.
Here's my card. If you think of anything else, give me a call. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
We're gonna find out who did this. I promise.
So we know Willie is alive at or about 9 p.m., and he's alive at 10:30 p.m. when he comes home.
What if Willie Jackson encountered someone on his way home from work?
We need to know where Willie Jackson was for the 90 minutes that he's unaccounted for in his timeline.
Hoping to find out, Kenda sends a detective to Willie's place of employment.
The Garcia Gym on Fort Carson opens at 5 o'clock in the morning because GIs have to get their exercise in before they go to work.
Excuse me, can I speak to the manager?
Yeah, sure. I'm Jose Peralta. How can I help you?
I hate to tell you this, but one of your employees, Willie Jackson, was found dead last night.
That detective speaks to Willie's boss at the gymnasium, tells him that Willie's dead, which the guy cannot believe that he is.
What kind of employee was he?
Well, he was great, actually.
Jose told Detective Freeman that Willie was a very good worker, always on time, never any problems with him.
The people he worked with really loved him. He was a model employee. He was on time. He did his job. And even though his boss may have suspected that he maybe drank a little bit during the day, because he was basically well-liked in his professional situation, nobody really ever raised the issue with him.
He never complained once if I needed something.
Do you know what time he left work last night?
He refereed a volleyball game, so 9, give or take. I can ask some of the other guys that worked that game and get back to you with the exact time if you'd like. I want to help.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Listen, you know if Willie had a problem with alcohol?
And Jose indicated that, well, I could smell alcohol on him, but he was such a good worker that never interfered with his work, so I didn't go there.
We're still trying to figure out what our storyline is here between all these different players. And then...
Come in.
Lieutenant, there's Miss Jackson here to see you. Says she has something important to tell you.
Okay, send her in.
Right this way, ma'am.
I have to tell you something.
All right, have a seat.
I was thinking, and there's something you should know.
Oh? And what do you need to tell me?
Willie was cheating on me.
Why didn't you tell us this earlier?
I'm sorry, my mind's all over the place.
Even though Willie Jackson is 65 years of age, he's quite the ladies' man. What if he stops by his girlfriend's place on his way home and she stabs him? It's happened before.
What makes you think he has a girlfriend?
Well, about a week ago, I was looking in his truck and I found some condoms. The hell?
The wife, Tony, tells me they don't use condoms when they have sex. Obviously, he uses condoms with this other woman.
Now I'm wondering if he was with her last night before he came home. I found this note.
So now we've introduced yet another person. Who is Jenny, and is Jenny married?
It's entirely possible Willie stopped by Jenny's house after work.
Jenny, you home?
That's Robert.
And her husband came home unexpectedly.
Back door. Go.
Obviously, we want to talk to Jenny. So we track her down at her residence.
Lieutenant Kenda, this is Detective Freeman from CSPD. We're looking for Jenny Harris.
That's me.
Much like his current wife, Tony, she is young and she is very attractive.
What's this all about?
We're investigating the death of Willie Jackson.
She admits that, yeah, I know Willie. He's in a large circle of friends that I have.
None of us can believe what happened. It's really horrible.
We'd like to ask you a few questions.
Okay, it'll have to be quick. My husband's coming home soon.
It shouldn't take long.
Come on in.
We say we're there because we have information that leads us to believe that she had a relationship with Willie Jackson.
Relationship? No. I told you we were just friends.
We were told that you were having an affair. Is that true?
I'd really rather not discuss that right now.
Jenny, you can be straight with us. Your husband doesn't need to know.
We want her to understand clearly that we're not going to reveal her involvement, or sexual or otherwise, with this individual to anyone she may be associated with.
We just need to make sure that you and your husband weren't involved in his death.
What? Fine. Willie and I were seeing each other. It was nothing serious, just casual.
She finally admits to being involved with him.
You know, he's a handsome guy. Wasn't really love between us. But I haven't even seen him since last week.
Is your husband aware of the relationship?
No.
Are you sure?
Believe me, if he knew, I would know about it.
Although Jenny seems truthful, detectives can't just take her word for it.
Fortunate for us, we're dealing with a very confined time frame. To commit a murder, you must at a minimum have the opportunity to do so.
Can you tell us where your husband was last night between 9 and 10:30 p.m.?
Yes, he was with me. We were at my sister's house playing cards until midnight. I can give you her information.
I'm checking it.
Yeah.
We called Jenny's sister to verify that they had no opportunity to be involved in the death of Willie Jackson on the prior evening.
Checks out.
All right, well, thank you for your time.
Wait, you're not going to talk to my husband about this, are you?
We're not concerned about that. We'll let ourselves out.
I know more secrets and have forgotten more secrets than most people will ever know. My only concern is who caused Willie Jackson to be no longer alive.
With their lead up in smoke, Kenda and Freeman are back to the most basic of questions. Was Willie Jackson even murdered?
Hey, Doc.
Hey, Lieutenant.
You finished with the Willie Jackson autopsy yet?
As a matter of fact, I just got the toxicology report back.
The coroner said he did have a very high blood alcohol content, but that's meaningless and very common in an alcoholic.
The leg wound is the culprit. And it's not an accidental injury where he ran into something sharp. It was made by a steak knife. And it's in the damnedest spot, too, the Hunter's Canal.
This area of the thigh has some veins and arteries that come from the heart, and so a fairly minor wound could cause extensive bleeding.
When we talk about blood loss, the important factor is how much blood have we lost. There's a certain point at which, no matter who you are, that's enough blood loss to kill you. In this case, we got a guy who, he's a little bit older, but he's very healthy, he works out. He's the kind of guy that could withstand a significant amount of blood loss before it's really gonna affect him.
It severed a vein, and there is some damage to the femoral artery. So the method of death is exsanguination, and I'm ruling it a homicide.
Exsanguination is essentially a very fancy term for bleeding to death.
Here we are. This is a scientifically established murder.
Given that Willie Jackson died a slow death, it's unclear what time he was stabbed. It's even less clear who stabbed him.
Absent any other suspects, one person who's obviously a person of interest is the wife of Willie Jackson, one Toni Jackson. At this point, we want to find out as much as possible about the relationship between Toni and Willie Jackson. So we decide we want to talk to Willie's ex-wife, Cynthia. We want to ask her two things. We want to ask her about Toni. We want to ask her about Willie.
Yeah, I heard he's dead. It's so hard to believe.
Can you tell us a little bit about him?
She responds about Willie that he is a good man and he does drink, but he's always been a good provider. She always speaks well of him until he meets this evil woman.
But that Toni, now she's a piece of work. Now she's the kind of crazy who would kill her husband.
Why is that?
She tried to kill me.
What?
Oh my. Well, that's interesting. We're investigating the stabbing death of Willie Jackson, and we believe his wife Toni is involved in his death, but we don't have enough evidence to prove it. And now, Willie's ex-wife is telling us that Toni tried to kill her as well.
Can you tell us what happened?
She tried to convince Willie to leave me and marry her, and I was not gonna have that. So I thought it was a phase. I thought it was something he'd get over, but that witch came after me.
The ex-wife says that she was driving down the street one day,
and another car was driving the opposite direction. The car looked like Toni's.
Did you get a good look at the person driving?
No, but I knew it was her.
And at that point, she told Willie, I'm giving you a divorce. Toni is crazy. I don't want anything to do with her.
Did you report the incident?
What proof did I have?
So she told police that it's not out of the realm of possibility that maybe Toni went a little crazy and went after Willie.
now she has nothing good to say about Toni. Toni is somewhere of a mix between Attila the Hun and the Antichrist, which is what you would expect the wife of 41 years to say about the new bride.
And that's why you think that she might have killed Willie?
Yeah. She's crazy.
All right, well, thank you for your time. I'm sorry about your ex-husband.
So you have to kind of disregard what she says about Toni, because she absolutely despises Toni. She broke up her marriage. But if Toni really did throw that rock, who knows what else she could be capable of?
Toni certainly fits the bill. I mean, if he's a womanizing drunk who picks fights with her kids, that's a motive to kill somebody.
True, but that wouldn't hold up in court without evidence. Plus, we're unaware of Willie's whereabouts for 90 minutes.
We know that Willie Jackson was stabbed after 9 o'clock, after he left work. He wasn't hurt at work.
There's a lot of possibilities of what might have happened. Between when he got off work and when he arrived home, he could have had an altercation with someone.
Or he could have gotten stabbed after he arrived home, and that also works.
Take this. Hello?
As this investigation is progressing, Detective Freeman got a phone call.
Hey, this is Jose Peralta from Garcia Fitness Center. We met the morning after Willie died.
Yes, of course.
The boss informs us that he spoke to a coworker of Willie's who was working the night of Willie's death.
Remember how I told you Willie refereed a volleyball game that night? Well, I thought it was over around 9, but turns out it was a close game. It went really long.
Yeah?
My guy said Willie didn't leave the gym until 10:05.
Really? Okay, hey, thanks very much. So? So it turns out Willie left work at 10, which means he went straight home.
So there is no other Mr. X or Miss X involved that's in the house. And who's in that house? Well, Tony and Malik certainly are.
But was it Willie's wife or stepson who had it out for him? For insight, Kenda and Freeman turned to a family friend.
Willie has a friend that he spent a lot of time with, is in the service with.
Thanks for coming in on such short notice.
I'm just really shook up about Willie.
He tells us that Willie has his issues. He likes to drink. He likes the ladies.
He certainly wasn't the greatest husband in the world, but he was a really good friend to me.
Did you know about the new marriage?
Oh yeah, me and my wife spent New Year's Eve with him and Tony last year. Despite the age difference, they really did seem like a good couple.
Has Willie mentioned to you about any issues at home?
He came to me seeking advice about his stepson.
Raising a teenage boy at age 17 is not a simple process when you're not his father. And so Willie asked his friend for advice.
Kid is out of control. He doesn't want to go to work. He doesn't want to go to school. He brings his friends over all the hours of the day and night. And anytime we ask him to do anything, he just won't listen.
I think it's just a phase.
At that age, teenagers are going through all kinds of hormonal issues. He was probably just coming into manhood, just trying to find himself.
His friend explained to Willie that that's normal for a teenage boy that's been uprooted from his father, so he's going to be an angry young man.
When I say angry, I'm not exaggerating. I can see it in his eyes. He's gonna snap one of these days.
You really mean that?
Dead serious. He's got it in for me.
I think Willie was afraid of him.
Afraid that Malik might turn violent?
Definitely.
Well, no. Is he capable of murder? Of course he is. He's a human.
You're thinking, when you first interviewed Malik at the scene that night, he didn't appear to be very upset.
Malik is an angry young man. He is physically superior in every way to his stepfather. And his stepfather had told his friend 3 days earlier he was afraid Malik was going to become violent.
Kenda wonders, did a fight between Willie and his stepson turn deadly? And did Tony help cover for her son?
We want to talk to Cornelius, his natural father, to find out about Malik as a person. Is he capable of violent behavior?
Hi, this is Lieutenant Kenda with the Colorado Springs Police Department. I'd like to ask you a few questions regarding the death of Willie Jackson. Is now a good time?
Sure, what can I do for you?
I said, so why is it that Malik is living with his mother and the late Willie Jackson and not with you?
Well, I recently retired from the Army and was looking for a job up here in Washington. Now, Malik was living with me then, but he was having problems in school.
What type of problems?
Kids picking on him, starting fights. He started cutting classes and his grades dropped. Thought the change of pace might do him some good, give him a fresh start.
He said, so I discussed it with my ex-wife, and she agreed she and her new husband, Willie, would deal with Malik.
And when did he move here to the Springs?
About 3 months ago, but things haven't gotten any better. The night Willie died, Tony actually called me, asking me what she should do about Malik.
Cornelius indicated that at that time, while he was on the phone with Tony, he heard Willie come home.
He was screaming at her. I heard her yell in the background for me to call 911.
And then the line went dead, and he called to have the police check on what's going on in that house. So we now know that Cornelius, in fact, was the person who made that first phone call.
I was really worried about Tony and my son. I mean, they had me freaking out.
Let me ask you this. Which do you think is more likely? That your ex-wife would be violent toward Willie, or that your son would be violent protecting his mother?
I don't know. I don't want to think any of those things happen.
All right, well, I appreciate the help. Thank you.
With Tony and Malik equally good suspects, Kenda hatches a plan to tip the scales.
When we start to focus on one or two people, we'll again review the physical evidence, seeing if it gives us a better insight into what happened.
What's this all about?
Mrs. Jackson, we have a warrant to search the premises for further evidence.
What? What more could you possibly need?
Please step aside.
Well, right away, Tony's very defensive, like, you know, we already told you everything that happened.
Luckily for Kenda, his crime scene technicians have something that can bring the truth to light.
Luminol is a chemical agent that crime scene investigators can spray at crime scenes. Essentially, it's a way to detect hidden blood or blood that's been cleaned up at a scene.
So we search this entire house. They spray the suspected areas where blood might be It will cause the blood stain to fluoresce in the dark. It turns a weird blue-green color.
Is everybody ready?
Sure. Wow.
And we find blood all over this house. When humans die from bleeding to death, their blood can tell you the story of the death. All of it speaks to, look at this. This is why Willie Jackson is dead. When we began this investigation, we had a crime scene with very little blood. But after spraying luminol, there is blood all over this house. Without a doubt, this is where Willie Jackson was dead.
There's blood stains on the walls. There's blood stains on the doorknobs. There's blood stains on the floor. A lot more than the human eye would ever have seen.
And it's very obvious that this is a much bigger deal than we thought initially.
Looks like he was stabbed in the kitchen, near the phone.
And they made a huge effort to cover up the evidence. Must have taken them hours.
Investigators begin removing carpet and tiles to place into evidence.
You guys are wrecking my house.
Well, that's not our intention. We're just doing our jobs.
So she is coming unstuck. Now she's very, very worried and has a very, very guilty appearance.
What, you think me and my son did this?
I find it awfully strange that you said the only place you cleaned up blood was in this bedroom. And now we're finding it all over the house.
But my son had nothing to do with this.
Then who did?
I don't know.
Tony's very upset. You know, what are you looking for? Are you insinuating that I had something to do with this? That Malik maybe had something to do with this? And then she tells police he had nothing to do with it. Well, you might start thinking, okay, well, are you just trying to tell us something? Is this the truth coming out now?
We're looking at her, and she's unable to maintain eye contact. Her body language is a flight body language. She's a nervous wreck.
You sure you don't want to change your statement? Anything you want to add?
I already told you the truth.
I mean, it's pretty obvious to me, based on my own experience, that Tony's up to her neck in the death of her husband.
But Kenda still needs Tony to admit that. And he knows just how to coerce her into doing so.
Okay. Are you willing to take a polygraph to prove it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Fine. Come on down.
Okay. Just have a seat for me right here.
She comes to the station, you know, all dressed and ready to go and seems very confident.
Have you ever done one of these before?
No.
It's okay. It's real simple.
But her personality starts to change. She starts getting a little bit fidgety.
To me, a polygraph in and by itself is not a scientific instrument. It's why they're not admissible in court. What is useful is if the person believes that that machine is going to say whether they're telling the truth or not and cause them to make a statement, then that is what is useful. That's why I always would offer polygraphs to people, not because I believed in what the machine said. I want to know what you say. I want to know if you think this machine is going to tell us what we already believe, and you're going to tell me I'm right.
Is that too tight?
You know, when you sit down in that chair and the polygraph test is about to start, that's when you maybe realize, wait a minute, maybe I'm not able to kind of lie my way through this.
Miss Jackson, are you okay?
Stop. I'm not gonna do this.
Just sit tight.
So the polygraphist went out and told Kenda, hey, she's not taking the test.
I stabbed him. I stabbed Willie. I was trying to defend myself.
It's okay. Just tell us what happened.
He came home from work that night already drunk. So drunk. I think he always has a few on his way home. All right, you should come see him.
Who you on the phone with?
Hold on. Willie, lower your voice. It's just Malik's dad.
Who the hell you think you are? Talking to me like that?
Willie, you drunk-ass fool. Can't you see him on the phone?
They get into a pretty good argument. They're in a shoving match now.
Hello? Man, come get your wife and kids. I don't want them here no more.
I'm gonna call the cops if you don't stop. Cornelius, call the cops!
And he then rips the phone out of the wall, and he's pretty upset.
What the hell is wrong with you? He took off after that. I think he was scared that the police might actually show up, and of course they did. But by then, things had settled down, and Malik was still downstairs, so I thought things were okay.
Do you know where Willie went during that time period?
I have no idea.
Tony explains that after the police left, Willie eventually came out of hiding.
What? Are you trying to get me arrested?
Willie, I'm sick of this. It's the same thing every night.
Why don't you just leave then?
Yeah, okay, maybe I will.
Standing over her, he is choking her.
And she grabbed a steak knife.
He lets go of her, and as he walks away, she just poked him in the back of the leg.
That blade finds the only place in his back of his left thigh that would kill him. It is magic. Or in the case of Willie Jackson, the worst possible luck.
He went to bed. I thought he'd sleep off the booze, so I started cleaning up before Malik came upstairs. I was so upset I didn't even know he was dying.
She never thought in her wildest dreams that, stabbing someone in the leg like that could cause their death.
In my opinion, I do not believe Tony had any intent to kill him. She wanted to hurt him, and that's not the same thing.
After reviewing the case, the DA concludes that Tony Jackson was acting in self-defense and declines to press murder charges.
She legitimately seemed to be telling the truth about being fearful for her life. He's choking her. He's highly intoxicated. Grabbing the knife was just kind of an instinctive thing. But I think she actually thought things could escalate to the point that she could possibly die that evening.
In my view, her crime was cleaning up blood, as she was ultimately charged with.
As a result of that, she was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation.
What's sad about this is that Willie, had he not been so drunk and passed out, he maybe could have saved himself. If he realized, I'm bleeding really badly, maybe I can call for help myself.
In married couples, the possibility of tragedy coming from constant argument is immense. Your behavior drives your life, and your behavior can also end it very suddenly.
At 2:17 a.m., a phone rang in a quiet Brooklyn apartment, the kind of ring that slices through sleep like a knife through skin, the kind that carries weight before a single word is spoken, and when the receiver was lifted, the voice on the other end did not ask questions, did not soften the moment, it delivered a sentence that should have ended a nightmare but instead tore it wide open, because this was supposed to be over. This was supposed to be buried with the past, and yet here it was. Dragging 1992 back into the present with brutal force, a year that never truly left this family, a year that turned a name into a whisper, a face into a fading photograph, and a street corner into a permanent scar on the map of New York City. In the winter of 1992, New York was a city that never slept because it was afraid to. Crime headlines bled across newspapers, sirens stitched the night together, and trust was thin as ice. And on one such night, a woman walked out of her building and vanished into that noise, swallowed by a city that had learned how to look away, her disappearance barely registering beyond a few blocks, a few hearts. A few unanswered questions that would harden into a cold case before the year was out, a case boxed, labeled, shelved, but never truly closed. Her name still sits in police files, typed in fading ink, followed by words like missing, suspected foul play, and no further leads. But to the people who knew her, those words were never enough, because she was not a file, she was routine, habit, laughter in the kitchen, keys placed on the same hook every night, and on the evening she disappeared. Nothing suggested a break from pattern, no argument, no note, no packed bag, just a walk that should have taken 5 minutes and instead stretched into decades. The street where she was last seen was loud, alive, glowing with neon and street lamps, traffic rolling past like indifferent witnesses, and somewhere between the curb and the corner, she stepped out of certainty and into absence, and the city kept moving, because it always does, because it has learned how to absorb loss without slowing down. But for her family, time froze there, locked at the moment when waiting became a lifestyle and hope learned how to survive on scraps. Detectives worked the case hard at first, canvassing bars, knocking on doors, questioning men who loitered too long and women who knew too much, collecting statements that contradicted each other, timelines that refused to line up, and tips that evaporated under scrutiny, and then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, urgency drained away, resources were redirected, new cases screamed louder. And this one slipped quietly into the category every family dreads, the cold case, unsolved, unresolved, unfinished. Years passed, the city changed, buildings were renovated, businesses replaced, witnesses moved, memories blurred, and what remained were fragments, a sighting that might have been her, a scream that might have meant something, a man seen arguing near the corner who was never identified, and each fragment carried just enough weight to hurt, never enough to hold, and every time the phone rang late at night, the family braced for answers that never came. The file was reopened more than once, usually after a tip from someone seeking attention, redemption, or money, and each time, the same cycle repeated, a surge of activity, cautious optimism, interviews replayed, evidence re-examined, and then silence, the kind that settles heavy in the chest, the kind that teaches people not to hope too loudly, because hope, after long enough, becomes another kind of pain. By the late 1990s, the case was already spoken about in the past tense, a mystery from a darker New York, a name occasionally mentioned in local crime retrospectives, always followed by the same phrase, still unsolved, and that phrase became a period at the end of every sentence, a full stop that suggested nothing more would ever be added, that the city had moved on for good. But cold cases have a way of waiting, patient, quiet, dormant, not dead, and somewhere, buried deep in a storage room that smelled of dust and old paper, evidence slept beside thousands of others, tagged and forgotten, until technology caught up, until a new pair of eyes looked at an old photograph and felt something itch, until a detail that once seemed ordinary began to feel wrong. In the early 2010s, as DNA databases expanded and cold case units gained new life, her name surfaced again, pulled from the archive like a ghost refusing to stay buried, and detectives who were not even on the force in 1992 began reading reports written by men now retired or dead, trying to reconstruct a night they never lived through, trying to hear urgency in sentences long stripped of emotion. What they found was not a smoking gun, not a confession, not a clear suspect waiting patiently for justice, but a pattern of missed connections, small gaps where answers could have lived, a witness statement dismissed too quickly, a vehicle description never followed up, a tip logged and never revisited, and in those gaps, possibility returned, dangerous, intoxicating possibility. The family was notified, cautiously, carefully, told that the case was being reviewed, not reopened, reviewed, a word chosen to manage expectations, to avoid reopening wounds too fast, and still, hope stirred, unwelcome and unstoppable, because after 20 years of silence, even the sound of footsteps in the hallway feels like rescue. And then, one night, decades after a woman vanished into a New York street, a late-night arrest shook a quiet household awake, flashing lights reflecting off walls that had grown used to darkness, handcuffs clicking closed on wrists that had lived free for years, and somewhere else in the city, a phone rang at 2:17 a.m., carrying words that promised answers but delivered something far more complicated, because closure is never clean. And in cold cases, the truth rarely arrives without dragging fresh shadows behind it. The city would wake up to headlines, neighbors would whisper, reporters would circle, and a name long forgotten by the public would resurface. But beneath the shock and the noise, the real question remained, the one that had haunted this case from the beginning and would refuse to let go now. After all this time, after all these years, after all this waiting, was this finally the end of the story? Or just another turn in a mystery that had already proven it knew how to survive? The arrest did not come with celebration, not for the family, not for the detectives, not even for the city that had learned long ago to treat justice as a delayed echo rather than a triumphant conclusion, because when a cold case resurfaces after decades, it does not arrive like a solved equation, it arrives like a reopened wound, raw, complicated, demanding answers that no longer fit neatly into the present. And as the suspect was led out into the cold New York night, cameras flashing, neighbors peering through half-drawn curtains, the question on everyone's lips was the same one that had been whispered since 1992, why now? Back then, the investigation had followed the rules of its time, handwritten notes, landline calls, patrol cars cruising the same blocks again and again, and detectives trusted instincts as much as evidence, sometimes more, because New York in the early 90s was loud, chaotic, and overflowing with violence, and cases competed for attention like sirens in traffic, and this one, a missing woman with no body and no obvious crime scene, quickly slipped down the priority list, not because it didn't matter, but because everything mattered, all at once. In those early days, investigators focused on the immediate circle, family, friends, co-workers, anyone who had shared a conversation with her in the final weeks, and the interviews were tense, emotional, repetitive, questions asked and re-asked, timelines drawn and erased, and nothing held, alibis were thin but unbreakable, suspicions flared and faded, and the city offered no clear villain. Just a blur of faces and footsteps moving past each other without collision. Witnesses came forward, or said they did, a woman who thought she saw someone matching her description near the subway entrance, a cab driver who remembered a passenger crying softly in the back seat, a bartender who claimed she'd been inside a bar she never frequented, and each statement felt promising for a moment before dissolving under scrutiny, contradictions piling up, memories shifting, and the truth retreating further into the shadows. One tip, logged late and almost forgotten, described a man arguing with a woman near the corner where she vanished, voices raised, gestures sharp, but the description was vague, average height, average build, nothing that would stand out in a city of millions, and without a name, without a license plate, without a second witness, it joined the growing pile of almosts, nearlys, and maybes that define unsolved cases. As weeks turned into months, the investigation slowed, press attention drifted, and the family learned the language of police caution, learned how phrases like, "no new developments," and, "we're following all leads," could mean nothing and everything at the same time, learned how to read the faces of detectives when hope was being politely managed rather than actively pursued. The years that followed reshaped the city and everyone in it. The streets grew safer, the skyline changed, technology rewired daily life, and the case aged badly, trapped in the methods of its era, its evidence sealed in bags that no one thought to test again, its relevance fading as new tragedies took its place in the headlines, and yet, quietly, stubbornly, it refused to die. What reignited it was not a confession or a sudden memory, but a routine audit, a cold case review ordered as part of a broader initiative, a chance to revisit old files with modern tools. And when her name resurfaced, it did so without drama, just another folder pulled from storage, another story to be skimmed, another long shot, until a young analyst paused over a detail that had once seemed insignificant. It was a partial sample, collected from an item found near the presumed path she took that night, something overlooked because it couldn't be matched at the time, too degraded, too incomplete, too uncertain, and for decades it had sat untouched, a technological dead end. But now, with expanded databases and refined techniques, dead ends had a habit of reopening. The sample was sent for testing, quietly, without notifying the family, without alerting the media, because hope is dangerous when it's premature, and when the results came back, they did not deliver a name, not immediately, but they delivered a direction, a familial match, distant but real, a genetic echo pointing towards someone who shared blood with the unknown contributor. That was enough to change everything. Detectives began building a family tree backward, tracing connections, cross-referencing records, mapping relationships that spanned boroughs and decades, and slowly, painstakingly, a name began to emerge, not a stranger, not a shadow, but a man who had lived openly, quietly, blending into the city like everyone else, a man whose proximity to the case in 1992 suddenly felt impossible to ignore. He had not been on any early suspect list, had not been interviewed, had not drawn attention, because in the chaos of that era, proximity was easy to miss, and now, 30 years later, proximity looked a lot like opportunity, and opportunity, paired with silence, raised questions no one could ignore. Surveillance followed, subtle, legal, careful, trash pulls, public movements, patterns observed from a distance, and piece by piece, the case that had once felt empty began to fill with context, not proof, but pressure, the kind that builds quietly, invisibly, until it forces a moment of reckoning. When the arrest finally came, it was swift, controlled, executed without warning, a decision made to prevent flight, to preserve evidence, to avoid contamination of a story that was already fragile, and as the suspect was taken in, he did not resist, did not protest, did not speak, and that silence echoed louder than any denial. The family learned about it the same way the city did, through urgent calls, flashing headlines, breathless reporters framing the story as resolution, as justice delayed but delivered, and inside their apartment, time folded in on itself, grief from the 90s colliding with shock from the present, because an arrest does not rewrite history, it reopens it, demands that old memories be re-examined under new light. Questions flooded back, details long buried resurfaced, moments reinterpreted, conversations replayed, and the past, once frozen, began to move again, unpredictably, painfully, because if this man was responsible, then the truth had been living in plain sight all along, and if he wasn't, then the family faced the possibility of another devastating false dawn. As the suspect sat in custody, lawyers preparing statements, prosecutors reviewing decades of material, the city waited, cautious, skeptical, aware of how often cold cases promise closure and deliver ambiguity, and beneath the noise of speculation and anticipation, one reality remained unchanged. A woman was still missing, a story was still incomplete, and the answers, if they existed at all, were about to be tested in a system that does not care about emotion, only proof. And proof, after 30 years, is a fragile thing. The man sat alone in an interrogation room that had been renovated twice since the year she disappeared, the walls cleaner, the lights colder, the cameras sharper, but the air felt old, heavy with the kind of tension that only accumulates when the past finally catches up to the present. And as detectives entered one by one, placing folders on the table, they were not just opening a case, they were reopening a year, dragging 1992 into a room that had never met it before. He had aged well, or maybe just quietly, the kind of man people described as forgettable, reliable, the neighbor who waved but never lingered, the coworker who showed up on time and left without fuss, and that ordinariness unsettled everyone involved, because monsters are easier to process when they look the part, and this man looked like someone who could disappear into a crowd without leaving a ripple. In 1992, he had lived 3 blocks from where she vanished, close enough to matter, close enough to raise eyebrows now, too close to ignore, and yet back then, no one had thought to knock on his door, no one had thought to ask him where he was that night, because he did not stand out, and in a city full of noise, the quiet ones are often overlooked. Detectives began with routine questions, name, age, work history, letting the rhythm settle, watching for tells, listening not just to what he said but to how he said it, the pauses, the inflections, the moments where memory seemed to hesitate, and when they asked about 1992, about where he lived, where he worked, who he knew, his answers came quickly, practiced, as if they had been rehearsed long ago. He said he barely remembered that year, said it was chaotic, said New York was dangerous then, said everyone was just trying to survive, and none of that was untrue, but truth, in interrogation rooms, is rarely enough on its own. They showed him photographs, grainy street shots, old building facades, maps marked with red circles, and as he leaned forward, squinting at images frozen in time, something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, a tightening of the jaw, a breath held a fraction too long, and detectives noticed, because this is what they are trained to do, to read the moments between words. The name was mentioned, carefully, deliberately, and his reaction was immediate, a flicker of recognition he tried to mask, a shake of the head that came too fast, and when asked if he knew her, he said no, said he had never heard of her, said the name meant nothing, but the room did not believe him, because names have weight, especially when they are attached to ghosts. Records told a different story. Phone logs from the early 90s, recently digitized, showed a brief overlap, a call placed from a public phone near his workplace to a number associated with her, a detail once impossible to trace, now suddenly loud, and when confronted with it, he faltered, suggested coincidence, suggested mistaken identity, suggested that public phones were used by everyone, and again, none of that was false. But none of it explained why the call had been made at all. Employment records placed him off shift earlier than usual the night she vanished, a schedule change that had never been flagged because no one had looked for it, and surveillance, limited and primitive by modern standards, offered nothing conclusive, just shadows and time gaps, the kind that let suspicion grow without ever solidifying into fact. Then there were the stories from neighbors, collected years later, people who had lived on that block in 1992, now older, their memories softened by time, but still sharp in places. One recalled loud voices outside a bodega late one night, another remembered a man pacing, smoking, waiting, and a third mentioned a figure who looked like him, standing near the corner too long to be casual, details dismissed as unreliable, but together, they formed a shape that was hard to ignore. The suspect listened as these fragments were laid out, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the table, and when asked directly if he had encountered her that night, he paused, a long pause, the kind that stretches time, and said no, firmly, clearly, a denial delivered with enough confidence to make it dangerous. Detectives pressed harder, bringing up the genetic evidence, explaining how familial DNA works, how it narrows possibilities, how it doesn't accuse but it points, and he responded with anger then, questioned the science, questioned the legality, questioned why he was being targeted after all these years, his voice rising, his hands shaking, the calm facade cracking just enough to let something else show through. Outside the room, prosecutors debated strategy, aware of how thin the line was between suspicion and proof, aware that juries are wary of cold cases built on memory and inference, aware that without a body, without a weapon, without a confession, the case would be an uphill battle, and yet, walking away now would mean sending him home with the knowledge that he had been seen, finally, after decades of hiding in plain sight. The family was briefed in careful language, told about the evidence, the limitations, the risks, and they listened, torn between relief and fear, because hope, once reignited, burns hotter than before, and the thought of losing it again felt unbearable. As the interrogation stretched into hours, the man maintained his innocence, refusing to break, refusing to explain the unexplainable, and when he was finally led back to his cell, the room felt emptier than before, the questions louder, the past heavier, because if he was lying, he had been lying for 30 years, and if he was telling the truth, then the case had just consumed another life without delivering justice. And somewhere in the city, the corner where she vanished remained unchanged, traffic flowing, people passing, unaware that the answers everyone was searching for might still be standing right there, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when memory and evidence would finally collide. The pressure did not break him in the interrogation room, so it followed him back into the world he thought he understood, because cold cases do not resolve in one dramatic moment, they tighten slowly, invisibly, like a wire pulled a millimeter at a time, and as word of the arrest spread, the man's carefully constructed life began to shift, not violently, not suddenly, but with the kind of subtle unease that makes every ordinary sound feel like a warning. Neighbors who had known him for years began replaying casual interactions, the nods, the brief conversations, the routine hellos that now felt contaminated by possibility, and reporters knocked on doors, cameras hovering, asking questions no one had prepared for, while his name, once anonymous, became searchable, shareable, dissected by strangers who felt entitled to answers the case still did not have. Inside the district attorney's office, the tone was cautious, almost restrained, because prosecutors understood the danger of momentum without substance, understood how easily public excitement can turn into public skepticism, and so they returned to 1992, again, relentlessly, pulling at threads others had left loose, reconstructing a night that refused to be pinned down. They focused on time, on the narrow window between when she was last seen and when she should have arrived home, a span of minutes that had expanded into decades, and within that window, they placed him, his altered work schedule, his proximity, his unexplained call, and the possibility that chance, not planning, had brought their paths together. A witness who had once dismissed her own memory came forward again, older now, less certain, but more insistent, describing a woman matching the missing person's description, arguing with a man near the corner, his back turned, his voice low, urgent, and for the first time, prosecutors heard a detail that had never appeared in the original reports, a phrase shouted, a name that might have been his, or might have been someone else's, impossible to verify, impossible to ignore. Defense attorneys moved quickly, framing the case as a product of desperation, a story built on coincidence and hindsight, warning that memory is malleable, that DNA without context proves nothing, that an arrest does not equal guilt, and they were not wrong, because cold cases live and die on credibility, and credibility erodes easily under the weight of time. As motions were filed and arguments sharpened, the family watched from the sidelines, learning new details about their own history from court documents and news reports, details that felt invasive and incomplete, because every revelation came with an asterisk, every answer with a caveat, and the question that haunted them was no longer just what happened to her, but whether the truth, if it existed, could survive the process meant to uncover it. Then came the discovery that shifted the case again, quietly, almost accidentally, when an investigator revisiting property records noticed an address that overlapped, a storage space rented by the suspect in the early 90s, located just outside the borough, never searched, never flagged, its existence buried in paperwork that no one had reason to examine until now. A warrant was obtained, cautious, limited, aware of how fragile the case already was, and when the door was opened, it revealed nothing dramatic, no hidden remains, no blood-stained objects, just boxes, old furniture, debris from a life lived and rearranged many times over, and for a moment, it seemed like another dead end. But cold cases rarely announce their breakthroughs loudly. In one box, beneath layers of unrelated items, investigators found an object that made the room go still, something mundane, easily overlooked, something that could belong to anyone, and yet, when compared to photographs from 1992, it matched a detail mentioned once, briefly, in an early witness statement, a detail that had never been followed up, because at the time, it had seemed too small to matter. Forensic testing was ordered, careful, methodical, aware that expectations can contaminate conclusions, and as the days passed, the city waited again, caught between anticipation and fatigue, because the story had already twisted so many times that certainty felt like a dangerous promise. When the results came back, they did not close the case, they complicated it, suggesting contact, not violence, proximity, not motive, evidence that placed two lives briefly in the same space without explaining what happened next, and that ambiguity split public opinion, some seeing confirmation, others seeing manipulation, and the truth, as always, sat somewhere beyond reach. The suspect maintained his innocence, his lawyers reinforcing the narrative of coincidence, of a man unfairly targeted by the advancement of science and the erosion of memory, and yet, the cumulative weight of details, the call, the schedule change, the witness accounts, the object in storage, began to form a story that was harder to dismiss, even if it could not yet be proven. As pre-trial hearings loomed, the judge's rulings would determine which pieces of the past were allowed to speak, which would remain silent, and everyone involved understood that the outcome might hinge not on what happened in 1992, but on how convincingly it could be reconstructed now, decades later, under fluorescent lights and legal scrutiny. The city's attention wavered, headlines moved on, but for the family, for the detectives, for the man at the center of it all, time narrowed again, compressing into waiting, into nights spent staring at ceilings, listening for phones that might ring, because cold cases do not end cleanly, they drag everyone forward while pulling them backward at the same time. And as the case edged closer to court, one unsettling thought refused to fade. If the truth had been this close all along, hidden in plain sight, how many other answers were still buried, waiting for someone to notice the detail that finally makes everything fall apart? The courtroom did not feel like a place of resolution, it felt like a corridor between eras, a narrow space where 1992 and the present were forced to face each other under oath, and as the proceedings began, every word spoken carried the weight of years that had never been accounted for, years that now demanded to be explained in a language precise enough to satisfy the law but flexible enough to hold grief. The prosecution moved first, careful not to oversell what they could not guarantee, framing the case as a convergence rather than a revelation, a series of small, unremarkable details that, when viewed together, pointed in one direction, and only one, toward the man sitting at the defense table, his expression controlled, his posture rigid, a study in restraint. They spoke of proximity, of timing, of opportunity, of how the city in 1992 had been chaotic enough to hide a crime in plain sight, and they reminded the court that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially in an era before cameras watched every corner and every movement was logged by a device in someone's pocket. Witnesses were called, one by one, their voices softer than the headlines that had resurrected the case, each struggling with memory, with doubt, with the fear of being wrong after so long, and as they spoke, the past flickered into existence in fragments, a raised voice, a figure near a bodega, a sense of unease that had never fully gone away. The defense countered with precision, attacking the reliability of recollection, pointing out inconsistencies, reminding the jury that memory degrades, that suggestion reshapes perception, and that a story retold enough times becomes something else entirely, and they asked a simple, devastating question: if this was so clear now, why was it invisible then? Experts testified on DNA, explaining probabilities, margins of error, the difference between possibility and certainty, and while the science impressed, it did not conclude, it hinted, it narrowed, it suggested, but it did not declare, and in a case without a body, without a weapon, suggestion was a dangerous foundation. The family sat through it all, absorbing technical language that felt detached from their reality, because for them, this was not a lesson in forensic advancement, it was a reckoning with time lost, birthdays missed, questions unanswered, and every argument felt personal, even when it wasn't meant to be. As the days passed, tension thickened, and then came the testimony that shifted the room, not because it proved anything outright, but because it introduced doubt where certainty had seemed to be forming. A former co-worker of the suspect, someone who had never spoken to police before, now claiming to remember a conversation from 1992, a remark about a woman, about an argument, about something that went wrong. The defense moved quickly to discredit the witness, pointing out the delay, the lack of corroboration, the possibility of media influence, and the judge allowed the testimony to stand but cautioned the jury, and in that caution, the fragility of the case became unmistakable. Outside the courtroom, public opinion swung again, commentators dissected every development, social media filled with theories, and the story morphed, as it always does, into something consumed rather than understood, and through it all, the core question remained unresolved. As closing arguments approached, both sides faced the same uncomfortable truth. No matter the verdict, the past would not be restored, and the city would not return what it had taken, and the jury would be asked not to find perfection, but to decide whether the story presented was strong enough to carry the weight of a conviction. The judge's instructions were clear, almost stark, reminding the jury that doubt is not the enemy of justice, but its safeguard, and as deliberations began, the room emptied, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any testimony. Hours stretched, then days, and with every passing moment, the tension sharpened, because in cold cases, verdicts do not just decide guilt or innocence, they redefine history, they tell families how to remember, they tell cities how to move on. When the jury finally returned, their faces revealed nothing, and the verdict, when read, did not land like an explosion, it landed like a collapse, a decision that satisfied no one completely, that answered some questions while amplifying others, because it was not the clean resolution the headlines had promised. The courtroom absorbed the outcome in stunned quiet, the family processing relief and disappointment simultaneously, the suspect reacting with a composure that could be read in any number of ways, and the city, once again, was left to grapple with a truth that felt unfinished. Because even as the gavel fell, even as legal procedures moved forward, one fact remained untouched by argument or ruling. A woman was still missing, her story still incomplete, and the cold case, no matter what the records would say, refused to feel solved. The verdict did not quiet the city, it unsettled it, because nothing about it felt final, nothing about it felt like an ending anyone could lean on, and in the days that followed, New York returned to its routines with a low hum of unease, as if the ground beneath the story had shifted just enough to throw everything slightly off balance. For the family, there was no victory, no relief clean enough to celebrate, only a strange emotional aftertaste, the kind that lingers when something monumental happens and yet the central absence remains untouched, the chairs still empty, the photographs still frozen in time, the questions still circling without a place to land. They were told the system had done its job, told this was justice working as intended, and they nodded, because nodding was easier than arguing with a process that had already taken so much from them. The suspect returned to a life altered but intact, watched now, recognized now, a man whose name would forever be linked to a disappearance he denied, a man living under a shadow that did not dissipate with legal language. Acquitted or not, charged or not, the label stuck, and in a city that remembers selectively but never forgets completely, that kind of association becomes its own sentence. Detectives involved in the case moved on to new files, new faces, new tragedies, but the unresolved weight followed them, a reminder of how easily certainty slips through the cracks of time. Some questioned whether the case should have been brought at all, whether the evidence had been strong enough, whether hope had been raised only to be fractured again. Others believed it had been necessary, that silence was worse than ambiguity, that forcing the past into the open had value even without resolution. The media, always hungry for closure, began to lose interest, the headlines shrinking, the updates buried deeper in the pages, and soon the story became what it had been for most of its life, a reference point, a footnote, a case mentioned in passing when cold cases were discussed, its details simplified, its complexity flattened for consumption. But within the community where she had lived, the case lingered, whispered about in grocery stores and on stoops, neighbors debating what they believed, who they trusted, whether justice had been served or merely performed. Old tensions resurfaced, suspicions rekindled, because unresolved stories have a way of reopening old fractures, reminding people of how fragile certainty really is. The family received letters, some supportive, some accusatory, strangers projecting their own conclusions onto a story they felt entitled to interpret, and each letter was a reminder that the case no longer belonged solely to those who had lived it, it had become public property, dissected and debated without regard for the people still carrying its weight. At night, the phone still rang sometimes, not with answers, but with echoes, reporters seeking comments, acquaintances revisiting theories, and every ring carried a flicker of dread, because even after everything, the hope for clarity had not died, it had simply learned how to exist quietly, without expectation. Cold cases, once reopened, rarely return to sleep. They linger in databases, in conversations, in the back of investigators' minds, and this one was no exception. New tips arrived sporadically, each promising, each collapsing under examination, and the file grew thicker, not with solutions, but with attempts. Years passed again, not as loudly as before, but with the same persistence, and the city changed once more, buildings replaced, people moved, memories thinned, and yet, the question remained anchored to that corner in Brooklyn, to that night in 1992, to the moment when a woman stepped out and never returned. And in the absence of answers, the community learned to live with an uncomfortable truth, that justice and truth are not always the same thing, that the law can speak while reality remains silent, and that some stories refuse to end, not because they are unsolvable, but because they are unfinished in ways no verdict can fix. The first new tip arrived without drama, without urgency, typed into an online form late at night by someone who did not leave a phone number, did not ask for protection, did not claim certainty, only wrote that there was something they had carried for a long time and could not carry anymore. And in cold cases, those are the words that make investigators pause, because guilt rarely announces itself, it leaks. The message referenced a gathering in the early 90s, a small apartment, loud music, cheap drinks, people coming and going, the kind of night that blurs into anonymity, and somewhere in the noise, a man talking too much, saying something he shouldn't have said, something about a woman, about a fight, about panic, words half swallowed by laughter and disbelief, dismissed at the time as drunken exaggeration, but now, reread decades later. They felt different, heavier, sharper. Detectives reopened the file, again, reluctantly, aware of how thin patience had become, aware of how many times this story had promised more than it delivered, and they tracked the IP address, followed the trail, and found a person who had moved states, changed jobs, built a life far from New York, a person who insisted they were not seeking attention, only relief. The interview was careful, restrained, the kind conducted by people who know how easily memory can be shaped by suggestion, and as the witness spoke, their account wavered, not in substance but in detail, names uncertain, dates blurred, but the emotional core remained intact, the sense that something had gone wrong and everyone in the room had chosen, silently, collectively, to ignore it. They named the suspect, not confidently, but instinctively, said his voice matched the one they remembered, said his posture, his mannerisms, the way he had spoken about being watched, about needing to be careful, all of it aligned in ways that made coincidence feel less convincing, and when confronted with the possibility of being wrong, the witness did not resist, did not argue, only said that being wrong was something they could live with, but being silent any longer was not. The defense moved to dismiss the new information as unreliable, tainted by media exposure, by years of speculation, and legally, they were on solid ground, because hearsay ages badly, and courts are wary of ghosts. But outside the courtroom, the effect was immediate, public interest flared again, the story resurfaced, and the question returned with renewed force. What if this case had never been as empty as it seemed? The family was informed, again, their reactions now tempered by experience, hope held at arm's length, because they had learned what it meant to be lifted and dropped by developments that could not hold their weight, and yet, even guarded hope is still hope, and it still hurts when it breathes. Another tip followed, this one from a man nearing the end of his life, contacting police through an attorney, asking for no deals, no promises, only a chance to say something before it was too late, and when detectives sat across from him in a quiet room, his voice was steady, his story fragmented, but his urgency was unmistakable. He spoke of a favor asked, of helping move something heavy late at night, of being told not to ask questions, of understanding, even then, that some questions should never be answered, and as he spoke, his hands trembled, not with fear of consequence, but with the exhaustion of carrying a secret that had outlived its usefulness. He did not name the suspect outright, danced around it, offered descriptions that aligned without confirming, and when pressed, he shut down, repeating that he had said all he could say, that he had done what he came to do, and legally, his statement was insufficient, incomplete, impossible to verify, but emotionally, it landed like a blow. Investigators compared timelines, locations, cross-referenced statements, searching for overlap, for something solid enough to anchor the narrative, and what they found was not certainty, but convergence, multiple accounts pointing toward the same narrow window, the same stretch of time, the same unaccounted-for hours that had haunted the case since the beginning. The suspect was questioned again, older now, more guarded, his denials sharper, more rehearsed, his frustration more visible, and when confronted with the new accounts, he dismissed them as lies, as opportunism, as the predictable noise that surrounds any unresolved story, and in his voice, there was anger, but also fatigue, the kind that comes from defending the same truth for too long, whether it is real or constructed. The law moved slowly, cautiously, aware that reopening proceedings without new physical evidence risked collapse, and so the case hovered in a strange limbo, alive but not advancing, visible but not actionable, a story once again outpacing the system meant to contain it. And in that limbo, something shifted. Because for the first time, the question was no longer whether someone would talk, but whether anyone would listen closely enough to hear what had been hidden in plain sight all along, in half-statements, in favors done without questions, in rooms full of people who chose silence because it was easier than consequence. Cold cases do not end when the truth emerges, they end when the truth becomes unavoidable, and as these late voices joined the chorus of the past, the story felt closer to that threshold than it ever had before, trembling there, unstable, threatening to tip into revelation or retreat once more into shadow. The darkest theories had always lived on the fringes of the investigation, spoken in lowered voices, written off as too disturbing, too speculative, too cruel to articulate without proof. But now, as late confessions stacked against one another and silence began to look less like coincidence and more like design, those theories moved to the center, demanding to be considered. Investigators began asking a question that had been avoided for years, not because it was unlikely, but because it was unbearable. What if she had not been taken far? What if she had never left the neighborhood at all? What if the city had not swallowed her whole, but hidden her in plain sight? They returned to the geography of 1992, not as a map, but as a living system, abandoned buildings awaiting redevelopment, basements rented without records, construction sites that came and went without documentation, a city in transition, porous enough to lose people without leaving obvious gaps. In that era, whole structures disappeared overnight, torn down, rebuilt, repurposed, and anything inside them vanished with equal efficiency. A pattern emerged, subtle but persistent, linking the suspect to temporary spaces, places that existed briefly and left little trace, storage units, subleased rooms, short-term work sites, environments where oversight was minimal and questions were discouraged. None of it proved anything on its own, but together, it sketched a possibility that felt disturbingly plausible. One investigator described it later as a feeling rather than a conclusion, the sense that the case had been misunderstood from the beginning, framed as a sudden act when it may have been the final moment in a longer, quieter progression, a relationship unseen, an interaction normalized enough not to raise alarms until it ended badly. Old social circles were revisited, names pulled from guest lists, party photos examined, phone numbers traced to disconnected lines, and slowly, a picture formed of a world where people crossed paths without leaving records, where familiarity did not require documentation, and where a woman could be known by several people without any of them knowing her well enough to be missed immediately. This reframing shifted everything. If she had trusted someone, even briefly, the timeline changed. If she had gone willingly, even for a few minutes, the witnesses near the corner were no longer looking at a struggle, but at a transition, a moment where danger still wore the mask of normalcy. The suspect's history took on new significance under this lens. His movements, once seen as routine, now looked strategic. His preference for temporary arrangements, once dismissed as coincidence, now appeared consistent. His insistence on ordinariness, on blending in, felt less like personality and more like methodology. Psychologists consulted on the case cautioned against certainty, but acknowledged the pattern was familiar, not rare, not sensational, but deeply human in its banality. Crimes like this, they explained, do not always erupt, they accumulate, boundaries eroded slowly, trust exploited incrementally, until the moment everything collapses and the only witness left is silence. The late confessions were re-examined with this in mind. The favor described, the object moved, the insistence on not asking questions, these were not the actions of someone witnessing a sudden act of violence, but of someone responding to aftermath, to cleanup, to containment. Still, without physical remains, without a definitive location, the theory remained exactly that, a theory, heavy with implication but light on proof, and the law does not move on implication alone. The family was briefed again, more gently this time, the language careful, because the truth being explored now was not just unresolved, it was devastating, and as they listened, they faced a choice they had never been asked to make before, whether to pursue certainty at the cost of confronting the worst possibilities, or to preserve ambiguity as a shield against finality. They chose to listen. And as the investigation pressed deeper into these darker spaces, another realization settled in, one that reframed not just the suspect, but the era itself, that 1992 had been a perfect storm, a time when oversight was thin, mobility was easy, and disappearance did not immediately trigger alarm. A time when a person could slip out of view and be written off as another casualty of a city struggling to keep up with its own momentum. The truth, if it existed, had not been hidden by brilliance, but by neglect, by indifference, by systems that were not designed to notice what did not scream for attention. Cold cases survive not because no one cared, but because caring was never enough. And now, standing at the edge of what felt like the most honest explanation the case had ever produced, investigators faced a final, unsettling question. If this was what happened, if the answers had been this close all along, then the real mystery was not how she vanished, but how so many people had looked directly at the pieces and never seen the picture they formed. The final discoveries did not arrive like revelations, they crept in quietly, almost apologetically, as if even the truth understood how much damage it could do, and in a case shaped by absence, the smallest confirmations carried disproportionate weight, bending years of speculation into something closer to reality. It began with soil. A construction project on the outskirts of the city, routine, unremarkable, the kind that barely makes local news, was halted when workers uncovered something that didn't belong, fragments mixed into the earth where layers had been disturbed and sealed decades earlier, and protocol took over, cautious, procedural, the site cordoned off, specialists called in, and for those familiar with the cold case, a chill set in before any connection was officially made. The remains were incomplete, degraded by time and environment, offering no immediate answers, but enough to raise the question that had been avoided for years, and when forensic analysis began, every step was taken slowly, deliberately, aware of the consequences of being wrong, aware of how many times this case had promised resolution before retreating into ambiguity. The results, when they came, were not definitive, not absolute, but they were close enough to reopen wounds that had never healed, markers consistent with her profile, age range, stature, a genetic thread that aligned without fully matching, the kind of finding that exists in the gray space between certainty and hope, powerful enough to matter, fragile enough to be contested. The location mattered. The site sat near one of the temporary work zones linked indirectly to the suspect's movements in the early 90s, not provably connected, but close enough to reignite scrutiny, close enough to make coincidence feel uncomfortable, and suddenly, the abstract theories of disappearance were anchored to a physical place, a piece of ground that had held its secret for decades. The suspect was questioned again. This time, the tone was different. There was no confrontation, no accusation, only presentation, information laid out without interpretation, and as he listened, something in him shifted, not a confession, not a breakdown, but a withdrawal, as if the space he had occupied for years had begun to shrink, his words fewer, his denials quieter, less expansive. He asked questions now, about process, about timelines, about what would happen next, and those questions were telling, not in what they admitted, but in what they assumed, and investigators noted the change, filed it away, careful not to overread, careful not to project meaning where none might exist. The family was notified in person. There were no promises, no declarations, only the facts as they stood, incomplete, provisional, devastating, and as they absorbed the information, the years collapsed again, grief resurfacing not as a wave, but as a weight, heavy and immovable, because even the possibility of remains changes everything, turns waiting into mourning, anticipation into dread. Public reaction followed a familiar pattern, speculation, debate, analysis, the story rebranded once more, this time with the language of discovery, and yet, beneath the noise, there was restraint, an understanding that the case had taught everyone to be cautious with certainty. For investigators, the discovery forced a reckoning. If these were her remains, then the timeline, the methods, the assumptions would all need revision. If they were not, then the case had opened yet another door that led somewhere painful but inconclusive. Either way, the story had reached a point of no return, where not knowing felt worse than confronting whatever waited on the other side of confirmation. The site yielded no clear answers beyond what had already been found, no additional evidence, no definitive link, and as the excavation ended, the ground was sealed again, history layered over history, the city continuing its quiet work of erasure. But something had changed. The case was no longer defined solely by absence. It had shape now, contours, a place where questions could land, and even if certainty remained elusive, the illusion that she had simply vanished into nothing was gone. Cold cases do not resolve all at once. They fracture, they splinter, they offer truths in pieces, and as this one moved closer to its end, everyone involved understood that the final answers, if they came at all, would arrive imperfectly, carrying as much sorrow as relief. And as the investigation prepared to draw its last conclusions, one question lingered above all others, heavier now than ever before. When the truth finally settles, will it be enough to silence the past, or will it only make the echoes louder? The decision came behind closed doors, not announced, not dramatized, made by people who understood that in cases like this, certainty is a luxury and responsibility is a burden, and when the investigators agreed on their next step, it was not because every question had been answered, but because enough of them had converged to make inaction impossible. The evidence was laid out one last time, timelines overlapped, maps redrawn, statements reread with fresh eyes, and the story that emerged was no longer clean or linear, but it was coherent, a narrative shaped by patterns rather than moments, by accumulation rather than explosion. What once looked like disappearance now looked like erasure, not accidental, not spontaneous, but deliberate and sustained. Prosecutors weighed their options carefully, aware that reopening charges would invite scrutiny harsher than before, aware that failure would cement doubt permanently, and yet, doing nothing would mean accepting that the truth, however close, would remain officially unspoken. In the end, they chose a path that acknowledged limitation without surrendering to it. A formal finding was prepared. It did not name guilt in absolute terms, did not declare closure with the confidence of a solved case, but it stated what the investigation now believed to be the most likely sequence of events, based on the totality of evidence, and that belief, once documented, would change the status of the case forever. The suspect was notified. There was no arrest this time, no spectacle, only a meeting, a quiet room, a legal explanation, and as he listened, his reaction was restrained, almost resigned, as if he had known this moment would come, even if he had hoped it never would. He did not confess. He did not deny. He asked about consequences, about wording, about what would be written and what would remain implied. That silence spoke volumes. The family was called in next, offered the same careful language, the same restrained conclusions, and for them, the words landed differently, because after decades of waiting, even an imperfect truth carries weight. They asked questions, pressed for clarity, searched the margins for certainty, and when none was offered, they faced a choice no one should have to make, whether to accept this version of events as the closest thing to an answer they would ever receive. They accepted it, not because it satisfied them, but because living without any shape to the story had become unbearable. The report was released quietly, buried beneath larger headlines, its language cautious, its conclusions conditional, and yet, for those who read it closely, the message was unmistakable. The case was no longer a mystery without direction, it was a tragedy without a perfect ending. Public reaction was muted, reflective, less sensational than before, perhaps because the story had aged alongside its audience, perhaps because everyone understood that this was as close to resolution as reality would allow. There were no cheers, no outrage, only a subdued acknowledgement that some truths do not arrive with clarity, only with gravity. The city absorbed it the way it absorbs everything else, slowly, unevenly, folding the story back into its vast archive of loss and memory, and the corner where she vanished remained what it had always been, ordinary, unmarked, carrying a history invisible to those who passed it every day. For the investigators, the file was closed, not sealed, not forgotten, but concluded, placed in that narrow category reserved for cases that have gone as far as they can go. For the family, the closing was symbolic, a line drawn not under what had happened, but under the waiting. Cold cases do not end when answers are found. They end when the search can no longer move forward without doing more harm than good. And as the story settled into its final form, one last truth became clear: the past had not been silent because it was empty, it had been silent because it was heavy, and it had taken decades for anyone to be willing, or able, to listen closely enough to hear what it had been trying to say all along. In the end, there was no single moment that felt like closure, no definitive sentence that slammed the past shut, only a gradual quieting, the kind that settles after a storm when the damage is already done and counting it feels pointless. The city moved on, because it always does, because it has learned how to carry unfinished stories without stopping, and the case slipped back into the archives, no longer a question mark, not quite a period, something closer to an ellipsis. For the family, the days that followed were strangely still. The phone stopped ringing. Reporters lost interest. Friends, unsure what to say now that there was nothing new to react to, returned to their routines. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. The waiting ended. Not the grief, not the wondering, not the ache of absence, but the constant anticipation, the tension of not knowing whether today would be the day everything changed. That part finally let go. They visited the places that had defined the story, the building she left that night, the street corner that had swallowed her, the neighborhoods that had aged alongside the case. None of them offered revelation. None of them needed to. The truth, whatever shape it had taken, no longer lived there. It lived in memory now, imperfect, fragile, but no longer suspended. The suspect faded from the headlines, returned to anonymity as much as someone like him ever could. His life continued, narrower, quieter, shaped by a history he would never outrun. Whether he told the truth or not no longer mattered in the way it once had. The case had outgrown him. It had become a story about time, about systems, about how easily people can disappear when the world is not paying attention. Investigators occasionally revisited the file, not because they expected answers, but because cold cases imprint themselves on the people who carry them. They would notice small things even now, details that might have mattered once, connections that arrived too late to change anything, and they understood something they hadn't in the beginning. Solving a case is not the same as understanding it. The city never marked the spot. No plaque. No sign. No acknowledgement that a life had ended there in all but certainty. And maybe that was fitting. New York is full of invisible histories, stories layered beneath asphalt and routine, tragedies remembered only by those who were close enough to feel them. Years from now, someone might stumble across the file, read the summary, note the language, most likely, believed to have, case concluded, and move on without realizing how many nights were spent awake because of those words, how many lives bent quietly around an absence that never announced itself loudly enough to demand attention. That is how cold cases end. Not with justice ringing out across a courtroom, not with a confession that explains everything, but with a slow acceptance that the past does not always give up its secrets cleanly, that truth can exist without clarity, and that some stories close not because they are finished, but because there is nothing left that can be done without reopening wounds that have already bled enough. And somewhere in the city, people continue to walk that same route, 5 minutes from one door to another, unaware that a life once disappeared between those steps, that a mystery lived there for decades, unresolved, unfinished, and that even now, long after the headlines have faded, the silence still remembers. There should not have been anything left to say, and yet the case refused to stay silent, because stories like this do not end when the file is closed, they end when the city forgets how to listen, and New York has never been good at that. Long after the last report was filed, long after the final wording was agreed upon, the echo of 1992 lingered in places no document could reach. A detective, years later, would pause at a crosswalk near that same corner, watching strangers pass, and feel the old weight return, not as frustration, but as recognition, the understanding that some moments imprint themselves permanently, not because of what is known, but because of what was almost known, nearly seen, just out of reach. He would remember how close the case came, how it brushed against certainty without ever touching it, and how that near contact changed him more than any solved case ever had. The family learned a different rhythm of remembrance. Anniversaries no longer came with expectation, only reflection. They stopped waiting for the phone to ring and started choosing when to speak her name, when to bring her into conversation, when to let her exist outside of tragedy. In that choice, there was a quiet reclaiming, a way of taking the story back from headlines and courtrooms and returning it to something smaller, more human. Occasionally, someone would reach out, a journalist researching old cases, a student studying criminal justice, a stranger who had walked past the corner and felt compelled to ask what happened there. The answers were never simple. They couldn't be. The truth, such as it was, lived in fragments, in probability, in the space between what could be proven and what was believed, and explaining that became its own kind of labor. The suspect aged further, his name appearing less often, his presence receding, but the gravity of the story never fully released him. In private moments, people wondered whether silence was a form of survival or a confession without words, whether the truth was something he carried knowingly or something he had learned to bury beneath repetition and time. There were no answers, only speculation, and speculation, too, eventually grows tired. The city layered over the past as it always does. New businesses opened. Old buildings disappeared. Sidewalks were repaved. The ground where questions once circled endlessly was smoothed into something walkable, forgettable, ordinary. And yet, for those who knew, the city never fully erased what it held. It only learned how to hide it better. Cold cases are often described as puzzles waiting for the right piece, but this one proved something else entirely, that some puzzles are complete even when pieces are missing, that meaning does not always require symmetry, that understanding can arrive without absolution. The investigation had not failed. It had reached the edge of what reality would allow. And maybe that was the lesson that lingered longest. That justice is not always a verdict. That truth is not always a confession. That disappearance is not always sudden, but sometimes the result of many small moments where no one looked long enough, asked hard enough, or insisted soon enough. Somewhere between a door and a streetlight, between routine and risk, a life had slipped out of view, and the city had carried that absence forward for decades, heavy, unnoticed, unresolved. The case was closed. The silence was not. And in that silence, the story continues to exist, not as a headline, not as a file number, but as a reminder, quiet and persistent, that even in a city built on noise, the most haunting truths are often the ones that never make a sound at all. Years from now, when the case is mentioned at all, it will be in passing, a line in a longer list, a cold case referenced without context, without breath, without the weight it once carried, and that is how the world will remember it, lightly, almost carelessly, because distance dulls even the sharpest stories, and time has a way of sanding down pain until it fits neatly into a sentence. But for those who lived inside it, the ending never fully arrived. The family learned that closure is not a moment, it is a practice, something done repeatedly, imperfectly, on days when memory arrives uninvited and nights when silence feels louder than answers ever did. They learned how to hold two truths at once, that the search was over, and that the absence remained. One did not cancel out the other. It never could. They stopped asking what more could have been done. That question had no bottom. Instead, they asked how to live with what was known, how to speak her name without lowering their voices, how to let her exist outside the shadow of the case that had consumed so much of her story. In doing that, they reclaimed something that had been taken early on, the right to remember her as more than a mystery. The investigators, long retired or close to it, carried the case quietly, folded into their personal histories alongside others that had ended more cleanly. This one lingered differently. Not as failure, but as humility. A reminder that control is an illusion, that even the most determined pursuit can arrive only at likelihood, not certainty. It changed how they spoke about justice. Softer. More honest. Less absolute. The suspect's life narrowed further with age, routines shrinking, connections thinning, the world growing smaller around him. Whether guilt lived there or not became irrelevant to most people. The story had moved beyond a single man. It had become about systems that miss things, about moments that pass unexamined, about how easily a life can fall through the spaces between attention and action. Occasionally, someone new would discover the case, stumble into it through a podcast, a late-night search, a curiosity sparked by an old headline, and for a moment, the story would feel alive again, debated, theorized, reassembled with modern confidence. And then it would fade, as it always did, because fascination is temporary, but consequence is not. The corner remained unchanged. People crossed it every day without knowing what it held, or knowing and choosing not to linger on it, because cities teach you how to keep moving. There were no markers, no warnings, nothing to suggest that this was a place where a life once slipped quietly out of view and never fully returned. Cold cases are often framed as questions waiting for answers, but this one ended up as something else entirely, a lesson written in absence, a reminder that not every story bends toward resolution, that some truths arrive fractured and stay that way, and that living with uncertainty is sometimes the most honest ending available. In the end, the case did not close because everything was known. It closed because nothing more could be known without inventing certainty where none existed. And that distinction mattered. Because the most haunting part of this story was never the crime itself, never the theories or the hearings or the late-night arrests that shocked a community decades too late. It was the quiet realization that a person can disappear without the world noticing quickly enough, and that noticing late changes everything, but never enough. The city kept breathing. The years kept moving. And somewhere within the endless noise of New York, the unanswered parts of 1992 remained, not screaming for attention, not demanding belief, simply existing, unresolved, undeniable, and impossible to erase. That is where this story truly ends. Not with certainty. Not with justice. But with the understanding that some mysteries are not meant to be solved cleanly, only carried forward, carefully, so they are not forgotten again. If you listen closely to how the city talks about its past, you start to hear a pattern, a rhythm of forgetting interrupted by brief flashes of remembrance, and this case lives exactly in that space, not loud enough to dominate the narrative, not quiet enough to vanish completely. It survives in the margins, in the half-remembered conversations, in the pauses people make when they realize they've heard this story before, somewhere, sometime, but never all the way through. Years after everything else had settled, a box surfaced in a storage room scheduled for clearing. Inside were photocopied reports, yellowed notes, cassette tapes labeled in fading ink. Nothing new. Nothing decisive. Just the accumulated weight of effort, preserved accidentally, waiting for someone curious enough to open it. A junior clerk flipped through the contents and felt that familiar chill, the one that comes from realizing how much had once depended on these pages. The box was logged, archived again, and slid back into obscurity, its brief moment of daylight gone. This is how cold cases truly persist, not through active pursuit, but through inertia. They remain because erasing them would require certainty, and certainty never arrived. So they stay, officially dormant, unofficially alive, shaping how institutions remember their limits, how investigators learn to live with unanswered questions without surrendering to them. The family noticed how the world spoke differently now. Where there had once been urgency, there was curiosity. Where there had once been outrage, there was analysis. The language had cooled, professionalized, stripped of emotion. And while that distance protected strangers, it sometimes felt like a second loss, the transformation of pain into material, into content, into something consumable. Still, there were moments of unexpected grace. A letter from someone who had never met her, thanking the family for speaking publicly, for refusing to let the story disappear entirely. A conversation with a young detective who admitted the case had shaped how he approached his own work, how he listened more carefully, how he questioned assumptions earlier. These moments didn't solve anything, but they mattered in a quieter way. The city itself bore the memory unevenly. Some neighborhoods remembered too much. Others remembered nothing at all. New York has always been like that, selective in its recollection, ruthless in its forward motion. It does not stop for ghosts, but it carries them anyway, layered beneath fresh paint and louder stories. What lingered most stubbornly was the sense of proximity, the knowledge that this had not happened in some distant, unknowable place, but in plain sight, surrounded by routine, wrapped in the ordinary. That detail never lost its power. It suggested a truth more unsettling than any suspect or theory, that mystery does not require darkness to thrive, only distraction. Cold cases are often described as unfinished business, but this one had concluded in every way except the one people crave most. The work had been done. The avenues had been exhausted. What remained was acceptance, not resignation, but recognition, the understanding that the search for meaning does not always end where the search for answers does. And so the story continued, not forward, not backward, but outward, influencing how people thought about disappearance, about time, about the fragile line between being seen and being lost. It became a reference point, a quiet cautionary tale embedded in professional training, in private reflection, in the shared but unspoken knowledge that vigilance is not a guarantee. Some nights, when the city thinned out and the streets softened into echoes, the past felt closer, not because it returned, but because it had never fully left. The unanswered questions didn't press for resolution anymore. They simply existed, settled into the background hum of the city, permanent, unresolved, and strangely instructive. This was not an ending that satisfied. It was an ending that endured. By the time the story reached this distance from its beginning, it no longer belonged to any single person. It had slipped free of ownership, drifting between memory and myth, cited without context, recalled without precision, its sharpest edges softened by repetition. And yet, beneath that softening, something rigid remained, a core of unease that never fully dissolved, because unresolved stories do not age the way resolved ones do. They do not fade. They settle. People who were not yet born in 1992 walked the same streets now, stood in the same places, unaware of how close they were to the echo. That was the quiet cruelty of it. The city did not warn you where it had failed before. It did not mark the points of absence. It expected you to move forward without instruction, trusting that what happened once would not happen again, even though history had never made such promises. In institutional memory, the case became a reference, an example raised during training sessions and internal reviews, a reminder of how timing shapes truth, how delay distorts clarity, how the smallest hesitation can widen into decades of uncertainty. The language was careful, technical, designed to extract lessons without reopening wounds. But every lesson carried a shadow, the knowledge that improvement always arrives after loss. The family rarely spoke publicly now. Not because the pain had vanished, but because it had transformed into something private, something that did not benefit from repetition. They had learned that retelling the story did not keep her alive. Living did. Remembering her laughter, her impatience, her ordinary habits mattered more than recounting the night she vanished. In that shift, there was survival. And still, there were moments when the past intruded without permission. A song from the early 90s drifting out of a car window. A photograph discovered at the back of a drawer. A stranger with a familiar walk, a familiar posture, close enough to trigger that old reflexive pause, that impossible second where the mind considers recognition before reality corrects it. Those moments never stopped arriving. They simply arrived more quietly. The suspect's name continued to exist in records, attached to qualifiers and footnotes, forever linked to an outcome that never reached unanimity. To some, he remained the center of gravity. To others, he was a distraction, a single figure absorbing attention while broader failures went unexamined. Time did not resolve that disagreement. It only made people more comfortable living with it. What made the case endure was not mystery alone, but familiarity. There was nothing exotic about it. No elaborate scheme. No theatrical villain. Just a convergence of routine, chance, and delay, the kind of convergence that happens far more often than people like to admit. That ordinariness was what unsettled those who studied it. If this could happen here, like this, then it could happen anywhere, to anyone, without warning. Cold cases are often framed as frozen moments, suspended in time, but this one proved the opposite. It kept moving, changing shape as perspectives shifted, as language evolved, as cultural expectations of justice recalibrated. It became less about what happened that night and more about what followed, the long aftermath of not knowing, the slow recalibration of belief. At some point, even the word closure lost its meaning. It implied a door being shut, a finality that never truly came. What existed instead was continuity, a thread running through years and people and places, occasionally tugged, never fully released. The case did not close. It integrated. And maybe that was its final form. Not a question demanding an answer. Not a wound demanding repair. But a presence, steady and unresolved, reminding anyone willing to pay attention that certainty is fragile, that justice is conditional, and that silence is not empty, it is full of everything that could not be proven, could not be said, and could not be undone. The city moved on. The story stayed. Waiting, not for resolution, but for remembrance, for the simple act of not letting it disappear a second time. Time did what it always does when there is nothing left to pursue, it reframed the story without asking permission. What once felt immediate and raw became distant, almost theoretical, discussed in classrooms, dissected in think pieces, reduced to timelines and decision trees. But the emotional truth of it never fit neatly into those frameworks. It resisted compression. It pushed back against being understood too cleanly. There were nights when the city felt too quiet, when the hum of traffic thinned and the gaps between sounds stretched just enough for memory to slip through. Those were the moments when the case resurfaced most vividly, not as evidence or testimony, but as atmosphere. A feeling that something had gone wrong in a way that could not be fully repaired, only acknowledged. Former investigators spoke less about suspects and more about moments. The phone call that came too late. The lead that seemed insignificant at the time. The decision that felt reasonable under pressure and irreversible in hindsight. None of these moments alone explained what happened. Together, they formed a pattern that was harder to ignore. Not negligence. Not malice. Just the cumulative effect of small human limits colliding with irreversible consequence. The family felt the passing of time differently. They measured it not in years, but in adaptations. The way holidays changed shape. The way conversations adjusted to avoid sudden silence. The way grief became less sharp but more deeply embedded, no longer something that demanded attention, just something that existed, constant and familiar. They stopped waiting for understanding from the outside world. They built their own. Every so often, a rumor would surface, a half-formed theory, a whisper of new information that promised movement and delivered nothing. These moments still carried a flicker of hope, but it was a disciplined hope now, cautious, controlled, aware of how easily anticipation can turn into another form of loss. They listened. They acknowledged. They let it pass. The city continued to rewrite itself. Neighborhoods shifted identities. Faces changed. The past became harder to locate physically, easier to dismiss emotionally. And yet, the absence at the center of this story remained fixed, untouched by development or rebranding. It did not belong to any era. It belonged to the gap between what should have happened and what did. Cold cases are often described as waiting to be reopened, but this one no longer waited. It existed in a state beyond expectation. Reopening it would not restore the moment it missed. It would not return the life it lost. What it could do, what it still did, was remind those who encountered it that justice is a process shaped by timing as much as truth. There was a quiet shift in how people spoke about it. Less insistence. More reflection. Fewer demands for answers. More willingness to sit with uncertainty without rushing to fill it. This shift did not feel like surrender. It felt like maturity. The recognition that some stories are not solved so much as understood in layers, each one incomplete, each one necessary. The case no longer asked to be believed. It asked to be remembered accurately. Not as a spectacle. Not as a cautionary headline. But as a convergence of ordinary lives, ordinary decisions, and an extraordinary absence that reshaped everyone it touched. In that sense, the story never truly ended. It simply changed the way it existed, moving from urgency to imprint, from investigation to inheritance. Passed quietly from one generation to the next, not with instructions, but with awareness. And awareness, in a city that never stops moving, may be the closest thing to resolution this story will ever have. At some point, every unresolved story reaches a strange stillness, not because it has been answered, but because it has been fully absorbed. This was that moment. The case no longer pulled at the present with urgency or demanded attention with outrage. It settled into the background of the city's consciousness, not forgotten, not active, simply there, like an old scar that no longer hurts but never disappears. Those who encountered it late, years after the last official movement, often felt a delayed shock. They arrived with fresh eyes, with the confidence of distance, convinced that time must have clarified something, that progress must have tightened the narrative into coherence. Instead, they found gaps. They found uncertainty preserved rather than erased. And that discovery unsettled them more than any definitive answer could have. The story resisted final interpretation because it was never about a single act alone. It was about sequence. About timing. About how quickly a moment can pass from visible to invisible. About how absence does not announce itself loudly, but grows quietly while attention is elsewhere. By the time it demands recognition, it has already reshaped the landscape. The family carried forward without spectacle. They did not seek to memorialize the case itself, only the life that existed before it became one. That distinction mattered. It was how they protected what remained untouched by investigation and doubt. They understood something the outside world often missed, that resolution is not the same as peace, and peace does not require explanation. For the city, the case became part of its deeper narrative, one of many threads woven into a history too complex to summarize cleanly. New York has always been a place where stories overlap and collide, where some are amplified and others are absorbed without ceremony. This one belonged to the latter category, persistent without being loud, influential without being famous. Cold cases are sometimes described as failures suspended in time, but this one defied that framing. It was not frozen. It evolved. It informed policy, shaped training, altered instincts. It made people slower to dismiss, quicker to look twice, more cautious about certainty. Its impact was diffuse, almost invisible, but real. And that may have been its quiet legacy. Not an arrest that satisfied everyone. Not a truth that closed every door. But a shift in awareness, subtle and enduring, the kind that changes behavior without demanding credit. As years continued to pass, fewer people remembered the details. Names blurred. Dates softened. What remained was tone. A sense that something important had happened here, something unresolved, something instructive. That tone traveled further than facts ever could. The unanswered questions no longer pressed forward. They receded, not into nothingness, but into context. They became part of how the story was understood rather than something that needed to be conquered. In that acceptance, there was no defeat. Only honesty. The city kept moving, as it always does, layered with new stories, new crises, new headlines that demanded immediate attention. But beneath that constant motion, this one remained, steady and unchanged, a reminder that not every truth arrives cleanly, and not every ending arrives at all. This was not a story about solving a mystery. It was a story about living beside one. About what happens after the search ends. About how absence can become a permanent presence. And in that sense, the case never truly closed. It simply became part of the city's long memory, quiet, unresolved, and enduring, waiting not for answers, but for the simple, human act of being remembered. Long after the last person directly connected to the case stopped expecting anything new, the story entered its most dangerous phase, familiarity. It became something people thought they understood without revisiting, a narrative assumed to be settled simply because no one was actively searching anymore. This is how unresolved cases truly risk disappearing, not through denial, but through comfort. The city learned to carry the weight without acknowledging it. Sirens still cut through the night. News alerts still flashed across screens. New tragedies demanded immediate attention. And each time, this story slipped a little further back, not erased, just crowded out, compressed beneath urgency. The absence at its center did not compete. It waited. There were moments when it almost surfaced again. A redevelopment proposal that required historical review. A data migration that forced old files into new systems. A casual remark from someone who had been there, who remembered something small, something that once felt irrelevant. Each moment held the possibility of disruption. Each time, the thread stopped short of unraveling. Not because it was ignored, but because it no longer fit the world that surrounded it. Technology advanced. Methods improved. Confidence grew. People liked to believe that what happened then could not happen now, that modern systems would catch what older ones missed. But the case resisted being framed as outdated. Its failure points were not technological. They were human. Attention. Assumption. Timing. Those variables never expire. The family sensed this shift even without naming it. They noticed how people spoke with more certainty than evidence allowed, how conclusions hardened over time without new proof, how ambiguity slowly transformed into unofficial consensus. This unsettled them more than doubt ever had. Doubt left room. Certainty, when misplaced, closed it. They remained careful stewards of the truth, correcting gently when needed, resisting the temptation to simplify. They understood that complexity was not the enemy of memory. Distortion was. And distortion often arrives wearing the mask of confidence. The suspect's name became increasingly abstract, less a person than a reference point, invoked to anchor discussions that no longer revolved around him. He aged into irrelevance, not exonerated, not condemned, simply overtaken by time. The case did not need him anymore to persist. It had outgrown any single explanation. What endured was the pattern. The way routine can camouflage risk. The way silence can be misread as stability. The way absence expands when no one insists on noticing it early enough. Cold cases rarely end with revelation. Most end with adaptation. Systems adjust. People recalibrate. Stories settle into forms that can be carried without reopening wounds every time they are touched. This one followed that path, slowly, unevenly, shaped by those who refused to let it harden into myth or dissolve into trivia. Somewhere, a future investigator would read about it, not because it was famous, but because it was instructive. Not because it promised resolution, but because it demonstrated limits. And that investigator would pause, just briefly, feeling the weight of what cannot be fixed retroactively, only respected. The story no longer asked for urgency. It asked for accuracy. It asked for restraint. It asked for memory without embellishment. And perhaps that was the final transformation, not closure, not justice, not certainty, but responsibility. The responsibility to tell it honestly. To resist easy endings. To accept that some truths arrive incomplete and remain that way without diminishing their importance. The city continued forward, louder than ever, layered with new narratives that demanded belief and attention. But beneath that noise, this story remained intact, unchanged by repetition, untouched by resolution, steady in its unresolved state. Not waiting. Not fading. Simply existing. A reminder that the most unsettling mysteries are not the ones we fail to solve, but the ones that teach us how carefully we must live with what we do not know.